A lot of these techniques, they are not meant to develop your ear. They're meant to do something very different. They are designed to develop your ability to audiate. And audiation, for those of you that don't know, it's the ability to hear things internally. So if I were to try and imagine a composition in my mind, then I could audiate at various different levels. At the most basic level, you're able to kind of recall a song that you've heard before. Have you ever gotten a song stuck in your head and you just can't get it out? That would be an example of audiation, where you're actually replaying it in your mind, and to a certain degree, the level of quality is going to change based on your ability. Sometimes you'll hear it very clearly. If you're in a dream, have you ever heard music where you're hearing this music very clearly, and I'm distracting myself because I can see myself, but you're hearing music very clearly, and it's almost like you're live, you're there in person. So you can develop this level of audiation to that point, but it's difficult. It's difficult because your ability to audiate really requires you to be in a very relaxed, what I'm going to call an almost meditative state. And if you can get kind of to that meditative state, then your ability to audiate is going to be more realistic. It's kind of like when you are just about to go to sleep. You've got these hypnagogic and hypnagogic states that they talk about, where you're either going to sleep or you're waking up. Those states where we're not quite fully there, that's going to be where you can audiate most clearly. And so one of the things we can do is we can kind of close our eyes and allow ourselves to, you can focus on the breath, you can do a little bit of meditation, but you want to try and get to that state right before you go to sleep, and that's when you can hear music most clearly. Now, the problem with this is if you're trying to compose music using audiation and you get to that state, then it's very easy to fall asleep. The other aspect of it is you have to have a really good musical memory, because anything you compose in that state, you have to be able to remember. Then you have to be able to write it down. So what the technique builder does, and what we're going to be working on a little bit today, is it gradually develops the ear's ability to hear more clearly. And so if you have this book, again, you can go over and get it at UreMusic.com. We're going to start on page 61 with the overtone drone. And if you get it from my website, or they have it on Amazon, there's some other websites too, but it should say on the very first page, the printed date should be 2021 and revision 1. That is the most recent version of the book. Now, if you have an older version, that's fine. The exercises are still more or less the same, but the formatting, and if there were any typos, I pretty much weeded all those out at this point. So this is a version that I'm going to use so the page numbers will fit. So if you go to page 61, I'm going to read you a quote here. And we're going to talk about this a little bit, I think. But this is a quote from Nadia Boulanger. She was a pedagogue that trained some of the 20th century's greatest composers. Philip Glass was a student of hers, and so was John Cage and some others. If you name a famous 20th century composer, at some point they probably studied with Nadia Boulanger. So this quote says, "The history of harmony is the history of the development of the human ear, which has gradually assimilated, in their natural order, the successive intervals of the harmonic series." And that's kind of true. Hi, how you doing? Oh, thank you. I'm glad you like the books. So, if you think about this quote, the human ear has naturally assimilated, sorry, turning the volume down, these intervals over time. So think about Gregorian chant. It's really based on intervals of a fifth, a fourth, and an octave. And these intervals, they were very good for creating resonance, and they were great for being used in a cathedral or a church, because when you sing or play on an organ or something like that, a fifth, all the overtones start to resonate within it. And you'll actually hear more than a fifth. You'll actually hear like you've got an actual chord progression going on when we do these Gregorian chants. So what she's saying is really, in a lot of ways, we started with these perfect intervals, the perfect fifth, the perfect fourth, and the perfect octave. And then if you think about it, when we get to the 16th century, the Renaissance, and we're starting to develop counterpoint, then we start using intervals like the third and the sixth. So now we have all the perfect intervals, and we have these consonant intervals, the third and the sixth. And when you study counterpoint, you start with those intervals. You start with these consonant intervals that are used to create really unoffensive lines. So if I start here on a fifth, and then I decide to go into a third, and then I go into a fifth, I got to be careful how I get there, but let's just go back to the original fifth. It works. And then if I want to use a sixth in there, all of this works really well. I can move back into a fifth here, but I got to be kind of careful how I do it. We're using a little bit of oblique motion, which we try not to use in counterpoint. And then maybe I go back into a third, and we can just play along with this. I'm just completely making stuff up. The only thing I'm being careful to do is I am only using perfect intervals. And so that's kind of what she's talking about. It's how the human ear over time has learned to assimilate these consonant intervals first, the perfect consonants first, which is a perfect fifth, perfect fourth, perfect octave, then the imperfect ones, the thirds and the sixths, and then later when we get into third species, we're able to start, and actually second species too, we're able to add dissonance. So it's actually very hard to create this using only those perfect intervals. But what if I now can hold a note and I can use a dissonance? So that's a fourth. That's a dissonance, right? That's a fourth. So we wouldn't really want to use that. But basically, we can start adding dissonance. So how did we first introduce dissonance? We're going to do the technique builder, but I'm building into this. How did we initially introduce dissonance? If we have a second here. Yeah, I'm playing the piano right now. So I've got a piano right in front of me. It's an electric piano, but I like it because I can sustain the voices, and then for our exercise, it's going to be really good because you'll have a lot of time to listen into what I'm playing. But let's say I have a second. If I go and I just hit it like that, really dissonant, right? But what if I do this? Not so dissonant. You hear that? Really dissonant? So what counterpoint does is initially we introduce the dissonances as if we're trying to sneak by them. And we like to move by step. So let me show you an example here. Let's say I start in a unison, and then I go to a second, and then I pass through it and go to a third. Okay, that sounds okay. Tension, resolution. But what if I skip out of it? Okay, now I just drew attention to that dissonance. And so the history of music has really been about how do we get into this dissonance and leave it smoothly. And that's what Nadia Boulanger is talking about. She's talking about how we gradually assimilated these intervals, and then to our modern ears, that might not sound that bad. But in the 16th century, that was a very dissonant interval. So they had to move into it carefully, and they had to leave it carefully. And that's really the essence of what she's trying to explain here. So now we have all these different intervals. Yeah, the third is kind of unique. Yeah. So we have all these different intervals now that we can use. And a lot of that, people always say, why is he talking about Schoenberg? People think that I love Arnold Schoenberg, and I actually don't like his music that much. But when it comes to the theory of music and the development of sort of a philosophy of music, there are few composers that have dived so much into tonal harmony as he did. And he explains it in a way that really makes sense to me. And so it's not that I'm an advocate of his music, but I do like his ideas. And, he actually opened up our ears to make it possible to hear dissonance in a new way. So dissonance became something that you didn't have to necessarily avoid. It became something that you could use in a composition. And modern composers today have people like him to thank, because without that, we wouldn't have a lot of this newer music that we have today. So it's been a progression. And that's what she's talking about, is we've had this gradual progression of intervals that at first were not acceptable, and then later with time became acceptable. So the fifth, the fourth, the octave, those were predominantly used in medieval music. And then we get into Renaissance music and we start adding some of the dissonances that are diatonic. So think of it as the white keys on the keyboard if you're in a mode. And then later in the 18th and 20th century, we started to introduce chromaticism. So we started to go outside the modes. And now today, really, you can do anything you want. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. I didn't know where I was going to go, but that's where I ended up. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because if you look on page 61, we're dealing with the overtone drone here. This is actually one of my favorite exercises, and it's one I wanted to start with. So right here, you can see an example of the overtone series. So we start with a C way down here. Now, if I play that C, what's really happening is you're not just hearing that C, you're hearing all those notes that are written on that page above it, in addition to that C. They're all playing at the same time. But the further you go in the system, the higher you get, the more remote the overtones are, the harder they are to hear. So really what's happening is I'm not just hearing the C, I'm hearing the C an octave above it, a fifth above that, a fourth, a third, and then if I had another finger, and then a third above that. So do you hear that? That's actually a major triad. So it makes sense that in the classical period, we were so focused on major tonalities, because in the overtone series, right close to the fundamental, the lowest note that's played, we hear that major triad, right? And that major triad comes through. If you go a little further in the series, then you start to get dominant seventh chords, you start to get a major scale, and it starts to emphasize really the major intervals that we hear first. All right, so this overtone drone, what I like to do is go back and forth between the notes in the overtone series. Why? Because they are the ones that we tend to feel as being the most stable. So if I play a C, the first overtone is an octave higher, right here. So this doesn't feel like it needs to move anywhere. It's stable, it doesn't want to go anywhere. If I then play a fifth above that, that fifth has a little more color to it, but it's still pretty stable. If I then play a fourth above, it still feels stable. Now all of a sudden when I add the third, we're getting some movement. And as Duza said, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name right, that third is cool and unique, right? It is. It creates this feeling like it wants to go somewhere. Where it wants to go is kind of up to the composer, but it has this need to move. It's not like a fifth. It could sit there all day. I don't know where it wants to go. The third, though, okay, that one wants to move. The second, it's like, oh, we got to get out of here. We got to resolve it. So I like to start with the overtones first. So I'm going to guide you through this exercise. You don't actually need the book. I'm going to show you examples here, and I'm going to tell you what we're actually playing. But what we're going to do is we have that initial exercise. What this is designed to do is to just start to develop your ability to audiate initially. When I was in college, I was trying to develop my ability to audiate. And at first, I could hear a melody. That was pretty easy. But the clarity of that melody was a little more questionable. You know, could I hear it as if it was in the same room? And the answer was sometimes. I remember I was sitting one time waiting for a class to start, and I heard what sounded like a wind symphony. And it was a wind symphony or an orchestra. I don't exactly remember the ensemble. I think it was a wind symphony. And I remember thinking that it's in the book somewhere. If I read it, I could find out. But oh yeah, the book is showing in reversed. I don't know. Upside down reversed. Yeah, it's a camera. I don't know how to flip that around. But the idea here is that I was sitting there and I thought I heard this wind symphony. And it was coming from the dance room next door. And the dance room wasn't very big. There was no way a wind symphony could fit in there. But I was hearing it very clearly. And this is after I've been practicing some of the techniques that I put in this book. And I realized they were playing my music. And so it was kind of going on autopilot. And then later I woke up in the morning, right when I woke up, and I heard an oboe playing, and it was clear as day. And I thought, there's an oboe playing somewhere in the neighborhood. But it wasn't. It was just in my head. And so that's when I first realized that, great, thank you, Deborah. But that's when I first realized that you can hear things in extreme clarity if you go through the right process. And so I initially wrote this book because I wanted to share what I had learned. And this book is from 2021. My techniques have since developed since then, and I actually wrote it before that. But I wanted to kind of share this information so other people could have a roadmap to follow. Now, you may find that other techniques work for you. So don't be too pedantic about the exercises in here. And I get this sometimes where people say, well, don't tell me step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this. I actually had a review on one of my courses where somebody said that yesterday. And, you know, the response was kind of like, I just want the information and I'll do it myself. And that's fine, you can do that. But what I'm trying to do with these books and everything I do on here is I'm trying to give you the step-by-step instructions that worked for me. And then try it out that way. You know, try it out and see if it works. And then based on your experience, you can adapt it and do whatever you want. But, you know, I'm giving you the information and steps that work, and then you can kind of go on and do it yourself if you need to, you know? So the idea here is that you're supposed to listen mentally to every measure. So the first measure starts with a C4. We call that middle C. And you're supposed to listen to it for 20 seconds. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm playing it on the piano and I'm holding it out so you can get a sense for what that note actually sounds like. So we're not going to do the full 20 seconds, but what I want to do is just kind of listen to this for a minute, and then I want you to try and audiate it in as much clarity as you can. Start by hearing the pitch, and then start by trying to replicate the sound of the piano right now. It's a fake string sound, it's horrible, but try and replicate that in your mind. So here we go. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds to do that. Just sustain it. Okay, now hold that note out, sing it if you want to. I'm going to play it. Is it the same note you were hearing, or did your pitch drift? Okay, so if your pitch drifted, then what you'd want to do is you'd want to go ahead and listen to that note again, if you're doing this on your own, correct yourself, and try it again. So the book tells you 20 seconds, I'm only doing 10 right now. So let's do it one more time. Try and get even more clarity this time. 10 seconds, here's your note, and go. I'm going to play it for you. Did you get it right? Okay, if you got it right, great. So now we're going to go to the next note that would be in the overtone series, which is going to be the C. I'm going to put this here, an octave higher. Okay, let's listen to it for a minute. What's different between this note and this note? They're the same exact note. They're both C's. One is higher, but what else is different and what's the same? They have a quality that's similar, right? And that's because they resonate with each other. The C and the C an octave higher, or at any octave, they're all going to resonate with that C, and they're going to sound like a C. There's a quality to C. And part of the reason I'm using this synthesizer with a, oh, hi, Zev, how are you doing? Haven't seen you in a while. But one of the ways that we're going to do this is we're going to try and get into the individual sounds that each note has. They all offer their own unique attributes. Okay, so you're holding out that C. Now we're going to listen to the C an octave higher. So just 10 seconds. Try and hear the quality, the timbre, as much detail as you can. Try and replicate it exactly as you're hearing it. Okay, now I'm going to play it again and see if you drifted pitch. Again, if you drifted pitch when you're doing this exercise, what you want to do is correct yourself and try it again. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but eventually if you do this every day, your pitch will get better. So now we're going to do something else. Now you've got the C and the other C. We're going to hold each note for 10 seconds. I'm only going to play the first C for you, and I want you to close your eyes and try and visualize these notes in as much detail as possible. So you're trying to visualize what you can hear. Here's your starting pitch. This will be your second pitch. 10 seconds on each note. I'll tell you when to switch. Here we go. Starting now. Switch. Go back to the bottom note. Switch. Top note. Switch. Bottom note. Okay, so is it getting any clearer as you're closing your eyes? Does that help? Does that help you to hear these with additional clarity? If so, that's good. And what you'd want to do is you'd want to kind of go through the entire exercise. There's 15 measures. You want to go through one note at a time until you're pretty confident you can hear these notes. And I don't want you to think solfege. I don't want you to think anything other than, don't even think note names. You're going to kind of think note names to keep track of what note you're singing or hearing internally. But you want to just, the quality, that's all that matters. Remember, this is not an ear training exercise. It kind of works that way a little bit, especially because we're trying to adjust the intonation, but it's not an ear training exercise in the sense that I'm trying to help you learn a perfect octave or perfect fifth. This is different. We're just developing audiation here, and so we're focused on the pure sound and pure sound only. So good, Deborah, it's helping, good. So here is your starting note, here's your next note. We're going to add one more note now. The third measure is a G, and it's up here. Okay, so let's do something real quick. In quarter notes, we're just going to try and audiate this. I'm going to play it for you first. We'll play it 2 or 3 times, and then I want you to just audiate. Cycle through the notes at the same pace I am. Okay, now try and just play it like that in your mind for a few seconds here. Okay, now shut your eyes. I'm going to say, I'll tell you when to switch. When I say switch, go on to the next note. And when we get to the G, so you're going to hold each one for 10 seconds this time. When you get to the G, if I say switch, go back to the first note. We'll do it much slower though. We're going to give you 10 seconds on each note. Here we go. Here's your first note. 1, 2, ready, go. Switch. I'll confirm it so you can make sure you're on the right pitch. Switch. If you got the wrong pitch, adjust. Switch. 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 Okay, so that's the first exercise. The way you do this is you would, I know they're backwards. You know, that's actually kind of funny. When I was an undergraduate, I did my sight reading. I don't know why I did it this way. It actually helped me. But what I did was I turned my sight reading book upside down and I would read my sightseeing examples in class upside down. And the reason why this helped me is because I have ADD and I don't know, anytime something's really complex, it's easier for me to understand. If something is really simple, I tend to lose attention and I zone out. And so one of the ways I kept my attention high was I actually turned the sight reading book upside down and my sightseeing instructor was like, "Can you turn your book the other way?" And I said, "Yeah," because I didn't want to be rude or anything. And I said, "But I do read it better when it's upside down." And so why am I saying that? Because this is backwards. So you want to try and invert all this. But you can get the book, the links in the description if you want it, and you can follow this exercise. So when you follow this exercise, use that process I told you. I don't think I write about that in this book. But once you've gone through and you feel pretty confident with basically the melody of this tune, then hold each note out for 20 seconds. And don't be afraid to sit at a piano, because again, this isn't ear training. If you know the notes of the piano, sit at the piano and play the note after you've already articulated in your mind. It's just to check to make sure you're doing the correct note. Because there is something about, like Nadia Boulanger said, the history of the human ear is really just assimilating all these different intervals over time. There's something about starting with pure intervals like the perfect fifth and the perfect fourth and the perfect octave that allows us to develop the ear more gradually. It just, there's something about it where we can hear things more clearly when we do that. So start with this exercise. This is one of my favorite ones. And then you can do the next thing. Now, I'm giving a little bit more context here, but if we go to page 68, what we're now doing is kind of the same thing. Let's see, I think you can see that. It's kind of the same thing, but we're going to now sustain a note and we're going to hear two notes. Okay, so the idea here is if you've ever tried to audiate an interval, if I just go and I play this, can you hear both notes? Are you sure you're hearing both notes? It can be hard to know if I'm actually hearing a third or a fourth in my mind when we're first starting out. But it gets better the more you practice. Now, one of the ways you can do it is by using a drone. And we use this actually for trying to teach a tonally based ear training program. One where you're not so concerned about modulations or chromaticism. You just want to develop an ear really quickly. Like, for example, let's say you're trying to pass a college entrance exam. It's kind of a cheat. but you can learn what scale degrees sound like really quickly, like 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, and you can gradually increase the intervals that you're using, but you're learning based on a tonal center, and that breaks down at a certain point, and you won't have the kind of ear that maybe you really want to have. If you've ever taken a program like that, you've probably experienced really fast results for maybe the first 2 weeks to a month, and then all of a sudden the results stop. And it's because it's really great at training one particular dimension of ear training, but there are many dimensions of ear training, and I believe in using kind of a more holistic course. Also, just as a side, if you are having trouble identifying the notes on the piano, just take my Staff Speaks course here, because I teach you the names of the notes in a way that also teaches ear training and audiation. So that's an option for you. But here, in this exercise, what we're going to do is we're going to start with that C again. And we're going to hold it. So go ahead. I know I'm playing the note, it could be distracting, but try and hear that C in your own mind. Close your eyes. Hear it against this C. Keep holding. Make it more clear. Try and hear the original sound of the piano. I'll play that every now and then just to reinforce you. Don't drift. Okay, now while holding that out, try and hear a perfect fifth above that. Okay, so you don't know what a perfect fifth is, maybe? I'm going to play it for you, but try first. We're going to sing a G above that. It's a perfect fifth. So take a guess. Hold this note out. What's the top note? If you got it right, great. If you didn't, doesn't matter. Okay, so you can stop audiating. What the goal of this is, it's to develop your instinct for these intervals without thinking about what the intervals actually are. It's audiation. We're developing the ability to hear two voices now, but also we want to work something else at the same time. We want to work this ability to kind of instinctively feel that overtone, that G. We want to be able to sense that overtone, and we want to be accurate about it, but we don't care if we get it wrong. If we sing a fourth, and then when I play the correcting note, you adjust. You have just taught your brain that you did something incorrectly and you actually need to go and do that other note, right? Okay, so we're gonna hold out the C, and then I want you to try and audiate a G above it. I'll tell you when to do that. So I'll say switch. When you switch, you keep holding the C, and then you hear the G on top. It's gonna sound just like that, okay? In your mind though. All right, so hold out the C. Hold out the G. Go back to just the C by itself. You never stop the C, it's continuous. And hear the G. Okay, so let me show you what this sounds like. Hold the C. You can do this along with me. Switch to G. Hold the C. Switch to G. Hold the C. Hear the G. Now we're going to do this without the piano. So here's your starting pitch. Hold the C. Add the G. Hold the C. So when I say hold the C, let go of the G. Add the G. Hold the C. Did your pitch drift? If it did, just take note that your pitch drifted, and we keep doing this every day. All right, so now we're going to switch between the perfect fifth and the perfect fourth. So I'm going to say the notes you're going to sing. So the way we're going to do this to make this simple is you're always holding the C, it never stops. It's this continuous drum. But I might say G, then you'll sing the G. If I say C, let go of the G and just hear the drone again. If I say F, try and hear an F real quick. It's a fourth above it. So if I say F, you'll hold the F. When I say C again, let go of the F and just hear the drum. Okay, so I'll give you an example. C, G, C, F, C, G. Okay, you get how it works? So I'm just going to tell you the note to hold, and then when I tell you to go back to C, release the note and hear the drone by itself again. This is one of the first steps towards developing the ability to hear two parts. And just hearing that right off the bat like that, no preparation, it can be pretty difficult. All right, so hold your C, here it is. Close your eyes, hear it in as much detail as you can. Imagine it in a space, and maybe you imagine it being very narrow at first, and then imagine it opening up and taking up more and more space in the room. So actually visualize this sound starting as kind of like a narrow point of light and then getting into a larger and a larger beam. You're doing that from an aural standpoint. All right, still holding the C, here it is. Add the G. I'm going to confirm it. You're still holding the G. C. So now you drop the G and you're just hearing the C again. F. G confirmation, keep holding. C. Now this time when I ask you to hold the G, try and make both notes equal. Try and shift your attention between the bottom and the top note. At first, you might not be able to hear both the C and the G at the same time, like simultaneously, but you may be able to cycle through them. Like you concentrate on the C for a moment, then you concentrate on the G, so it kind of sounds like, something like that. Eventually, you should be able to hear them both at the same time and recognize there are two distinct notes there. So try and hold out that G now. Keep holding the G. F. Keep holding. G. F. G. F. Okay, so is that helping? Are you starting to hear these intervals a little more clearly? Can you hear both notes at the same time? Are you able to get sort of this extreme clarity where you're almost hearing this sound in your mind? Now, at first, it may be a little bit muffled. It's going to sound quieter. It's going to sound less real. But the more you practice this technique, the more it starts to become clearer and clearer and clearer. So here's the thing about this. As you're working through these techniques, it may seem like, okay, I can only hear an interval. But the way this actually tends to work is that once you develop this ability to kind of access that real, true premium quality sound, then it opens up quickly. And then hearing 3 parts is not that much more difficult than hearing 2. Hearing 4 is not that much more difficult than hearing 3. So you progress rapidly once your brain figures out how to do it. And it's much easier than ear training, because with audiation, what we're doing is we are creating whatever it is we want to hear and we're playing through it in our mind. With ear training, You're taking something external and trying to label, dissect, and identify. And that is difficult. So audiation, for whatever reason, it develops much more quickly than just ear training. So let's see, maybe we'll do one more exercise. So if you go on to page 69, what we do at this point is we actually go through the overtone series. All right, so it's backwards, but here we're going through the partials of the overtones. So the first one is C, that's a fundamental, and then we hear an octave above it, and then we hear a fifth above that. And then we go back down, and then we do it again. We go even higher. So we're just hearing the partials of the overtones in this exercise. Let's try that for just a moment, and then, I mean, that's chapter 5 for the most part, and then we continue to increase some of these exercises. We start adding 2-part counterpoint and things like that. All right, so let's do the overtone one. So we're going to hold that C again. Great, Mark, thank you. Yeah, I think that, you know, one of the reasons I wrote these books really before we had YouTube in its current form, and I've developed them over the years, but you can only teach so much in a book, and sometimes you just need a little bit of a guided presentation to let you know how to actually use them. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to show you a process that you can use. So I'm glad this is helpful for you, and Deborah, thank you as well. All right, so if we hold out that C, we're going to go through and we're going to do the partials of the overtone series. So again, what I'm going to do is you're going to take a guess. So I'm going to say C, an octave above. So I'll say C5. This is C4, C5, and then I'll say G. Yeah, the book alone is more difficult. And I know that. And people that have been able to get through the book, they have told me it's been amazing. But of course, it's very difficult to just write all this out and then say, go do it. You know, it's a hard thing to do. So we'll do C4, C5, and then we'll do the G up above that. So the G5 up there. So I'll tell you the octave register is what it is. All right, so let's hear the C. Go ahead and audiate that. Keep holding it. All right, can you hear a C5 above it? Go ahead and try and hear both notes at the same time. Here's your C5. Did you get it right? If not, take a few moments, hear both of these notes together. Cycle if you need to. Cycling can be very helpful. All right, keep audiating those two notes. Now try and hear a G5. Okay, now we're going to cycle through those notes. Starting on the C. Hold it. Close your eyes. Hear an octave above on C5. And now hear the G5. Now I'm wondering how many of you are experiencing this. If you are experiencing this, go ahead and say yes in the chat, or maybe say no, you know, like let me know how this is working for you or not. When we did the fifth, generally that's easier than trying to hear an octave. The more space there is between the two voices you're trying to hear, in my experience, it seems like it becomes more difficult to hear those notes. But of course, there's always exceptions, and some, yeah, okay, so Mark says yes. Okay, so, good. You're experiencing what is typical. Yeah. There's something about it. When you start to go beyond the simple intervals, and this is actually a premise of counterpoint. In counterpoint, you shouldn't have more than a tenth between the two voices. And you're hearing why in real time here. Because you are telling me, everybody that has responded, thank you, everyone, overshot the octave, yeah, that can happen too. But what I'm hearing here is that all of you are experiencing kind of the same thing, which is that the fifth is easier to hear than the octave. And then the octave would probably be easier to hear than the fifth up here. And so it goes back to a counterpoint rule where we try and keep everything within a tenth, because when you go past the octave, you start to lose like the gravitational pull between the two intervals, and it becomes harder to actually hear what's going on, as strange as that is. So this is why this is the advanced exercise. On page 69, I tell you to practice for 2 weeks because it's harder to hear this. So, I mean, my point here is that these exercises are graded in a way where it's based on a lot of experience. It's based on what I've experienced, what other people have experienced when trying to develop their ear. So why is it that the octave is harder to hear? Just goes back to this knowledge we have through history where, they always say try and keep each voice within an octave. There's a reason for it. It's because that's what creates the most harmonious sound, and also it's easier for us to hear. So this is an advanced exercise, and once you can hear the octave and the compound fifth more clearly, and then the compound octave, which is really difficult, it actually starts to just bring your ear in, and it starts to train your brain in the right way, and you start to hear this stuff much more clearly. So I hope that was helpful. I think what I am going to do is I might actually do some additional chapters in the future, but we're going to alternate. We're going to do some other stuff. And yeah, we're going to keep going through this, and I'll give you some additional exercises we can work on. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'm going to wait just a few minutes, and then that'll be the end for today. And we'll do this again next Wednesday, but we'll probably have a different topic. I'll put a poll up, and you can vote for what it is you want to talk about. But I hope this was helpful. I hope that everyone feels like this is going to help them a little bit with their process. Audiation is really fun. I mean, there's nothing more interesting than being able to just sit there and play through a composition. And so how to use this for composition real quick while I'm waiting to see if there's any questions. So as I said, it's hard to memorize something, right? And so in the beginning, what you do is you write out your composition, and then you go through and you follow the score and you audiate it. So you have to have certain pillars. Oh, so no, I don't think you can overdo audiation training. Ear training, absolutely. But audiation is something that is very internal, it's very personal, and you're being guided. So, with ear training, you want to try and avoid making mistakes, but with audiation, you hear a C and then you try and hear a G. You make a mistake, once you confirm the note, you just fix it. And so I have never found audiation training being something you can overdo. You can kind of do it as much as you want. Although, you should try and not do it all day, because what'll happen is you'll just be hearing things constantly, and it could drive you a little bit crazy over time. But no, I think with ear training, keep it to 45 minutes is ideal. Audiation, anytime you got some free time, just hear a C. Doesn't even have to be the C on the piano. Hear a note above it and cycle through those notes. Try and hear them at the same time. Try and add a third note. So you can do that, but then also kind of go through like a regimented practice, like what I have in the technique builder, where you do these exercises for just a few minutes every day. You do the combination of those things, then if you follow the exercise in the book, it kind of guarantees that you're going through a progression. And then if you just kind of sit there and play through things in your mind, you're allowing the creative part of you to work too. I actually hate being told what to do in terms of pedagogy and exercises, but in my old age, I've learned that sometimes if you just follow an exercise that's worked for somebody else, you can save yourself a lot of trouble. So great question, Deborah. Thank you. I'll see you guys next week for those of you that are able to make it, and keep audiating. Keep doing some ear training. Just a few minutes every day is all it really takes. It doesn't need to be this massive, overblown thing. Practice music, play music, listen to music, compose music. That's the goal. All this other stuff is just to make all the musical things we do more enjoyable. All right, thank you. I will see you next time. Bye.